All right, so we've come to the last couple of chapters in the book of Acts. We know that Paul has been under arrest and held at the port city of Caesarea for 2 years. And he had to appeal unto Caesar, which was a privilege as a Roman citizen he would have, that when a local magistrate was doing something that was wrong, a Roman citizen could say, I want to appeal to a higher authority so they can hear my case. And so that is what he did, because the local governor was asking if he would like to go back to Jerusalem to have his matter heard again, because he hadn't found anything worthy of death. I mean, Paul had been preaching the gospel. That was his crime. And certainly under Roman law at this time, that was not a capital offense. And so to go back to Jerusalem was to basically to allow Paul to be assassinated, that the Jews were going to kill him, and they've been trying to kill him for 2 years. So he'd appealed unto Caesar. And so 27 and 28, most of that is describing a very frightening and harrowing journey that Paul is going to take. And so I've got a map up here to kind of help us along to see what's going on, because we're covering a lot of territory in miles and time. So when it was determined we should sail into Italy, right? You're going to go to Caesar. You got to get there. You're over here in Judea. You got to get all the way up to Rome, capital of the Empire of Rome. And so they, the Romans, delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus's band. All right, so you've got a particular centurion. He's going to be in charge of this prisoner transport, and he's going to carry them all the way back to Rome. They are using, they are not on like a dedicated Roman ship. They are just finding ships that are going the direction they're going, and they are, basically buying passage for the centurion, his Roman soldiers, and these other groups of prisoners, however many they are. So we're here at Caesarea on the port city of the Mediterranean. That's where they're going to get on the ship. It says they entered into a ship of Adramyttium, which is where that ship was originally from. And they launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia. All right, so that means rather than going just straight shot across the Mediterranean Sea, they're going to do this kind of circuitous route that keeps you closer to the coast. Asia, this region up in here, is a province in the Roman Empire, Asia Minor. We're not talking about the continent as we think of Asia today. So modern day Turkey. Their plan was to sail along the coast to get there. You got more ports you could stop at, take on supplies. It's not as dangerous. It's just a straight shot. So, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Aristarchus of Macedonia, a Thessalonican of Thessalonica, being with us. So Paul wasn't traveling by himself. Luke is recording the book of Acts. He's probably there. He is using the expression like we had launched from thence. So you've got Paul and Aristarchus and at least Luke that are traveling. And so again, this is not like a Roman prison ship. This is just some ship where they're buying passage. And so that's why you can have Luke and Aristarchus traveling along. Who is Aristarchus? We've met him before, back when Paul was at Ephesus, and the silversmiths got so ticked off about Paul teaching the truth because it was hurting their business, right? They made little silver shrines of the goddess Diana, and here's this joker coming into town telling everybody that she's not really a god, and none of these man-made gods are gods. And so there was a riot. There's the silversmith riot, where things were just all up in arms. One of the two friends of Paul that was caught and brought into that melee was Aristarchus, and we meet him later as Paul is making the journey back to Jerusalem, which is what precipitated his arrest here a couple years ago. Aristarchus has been with him, so a long time traveling companion. He's been through the thick of it, and so he is going to be on this ship with Paul and Luke as they travel to Rome. So the next day we touched at Sidon. All right, so if you're on your ship down at Caesarea, you go north a little bit to Tyre and Sidon, those two major port cities. That's where they stopped. And Julius, again, that's the centurion's name, he was very polite to Paul. Paul was not your typical prisoner. Paul hadn't murdered anybody. He wasn't a thief. He wasn't a rebel as far as you could tell. And so, there's just exceptional courtesy and favor shown to Paul here. He actually gives him permission. You can go ashore, and you can go find local friends there, because there are Christians inside him, to eat with, to hang out with, to refresh yourself. And so he did. And then when they left there, they sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. What exactly the expression under? The island Cyprus is up here. What does it mean to be under? Probably means to be on the lee side of the island, so you got the stronger windward side. And so we know that they're going to travel from the next couple verses in the seas by Cilicia, so it most likely means they went on the northern portion of the island. Doesn't matter here or there, but you can just really understand that the detail that Luke is giving of this journey. So they left Sidon, they sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. And this is kind of our first indication that the weather is not going to be cooperative on this trip. When we'd sailed over the Sea of Cilicia, Cilicia is this region up here, that's where Paul's from. He's from Tarsus, and so they're sailing there, and then along by the Sea of Pamphylia, they come to Myra, a city of Lycia. So they're going to put in there. That's as far as they're going to go on ship number one. Right, they're going to get on a different ship. This is a ship that port city was Alexandria. Alexandria is way down here in Egypt. So they're going to take that one and continue on. That ship was going all the way to Italy. So the one that they originally got onto wasn't going to Italy, but it got them part of the way. So he put us in there. The centurion put them and the prisoners on, and we sailed slowly many days. All right, so you got a passage of time there. All we're going to get is trying to get over here to Crete. It's going to take them a really long time to get there because the wind is not being cooperative. We'd come over to Sanundus, the wind not suffering us. We sailed under Crete, so this is Sanundus up here. It took a long time to go very, very short distance. And so they're probably having to tack back and forth. It's not really being helpful. And so they wind up going, rather than going farther up Asia, they wind up going with the wind down here to Crete, over against Salome, this port city over here on the eastern coast. And hardly passing it by, came to a place which is called the Fair Havens, which is near to a city of Lycia. So Fair Havens just means a good port. All right, so they've made it in there. They've stopped. They're really struggling to make progress. And they have now, because of how long it's taken to get on this journey, they have now reached the time of the year where it is dangerous to sail in the Mediterranean. It's described as the winter months. And so Paul, points that out. It says, now when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them. Again, this is a prisoner giving advice to the Romans in charge. It says, sirs, I believe this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only to the lading and the ship, but also of our lives. All right, expression bills of lading cargo. Right, this was a cargo ship, had passengers, but they're carrying, I believe, a big store of grain or wheat. So he's telling the owners of the ship, and the master, and the Romans, this is going to be, a lot of damage if we continue on. Our lives will be at risk. Now the centurion, he listened to the master, the owner of the ship. Right, he owns the ship. He's willing to risk it. He thinks it's going to be all right, and so he, put his credibility and belief in that. And so he listened to that guy more than things which were spoken by Paul. And why do they continue on? Well, here's the reason. Because the haven was not commodious to enter in. It's a great word, commodious. It means it wasn't comfortable. Right? You got nearly 300 people on this ship, and you're going to have to, stay somewhere for 2, 3 months, 4 months, however long the winter period lasted. And there was a much more comfortable one just kind of around the corner on the island of Crete. And so since it wasn't comfortable, the more part advised to depart thence. Right, so there's more folks who are in favor of leaving to try and get to the city of Phoenice, and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete, and lieth towards the southwest and the northwest. How does that make sense? Well, you're going to have to travel southwest and then go up northwest around the horn of the island to get there. So they decided to do that, and then there was a day when the south wind was blowing softly. Right, so they're like, okay, we've got a wind blowing in from the south. It's soft. We're going to be able to just scoot around the island and get up to the spot. We'll be able to lay there for several months, be comfortable. Supposing they'd obtained their purpose, all right, we're going to be able to do it. They loosed thence from the fair havens, and they sailed close by Crete. All right, so they're sticking real close to the island, not risking it much, just trying to scoot around. I think it's only like 50 miles. Right? But not long after, there arose a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon, which I believe I looked that up, and it basically means this violent waves storm from the east. All right, so rather than blowing them from the south to the north, you've now got a wind coming in from the east. It's blowing you out into the sea. Big waves, and the ship was caught. We couldn't stay close to the island. And so it couldn't bear up in the wind, which means there was too much wind for the sails of this, ancient ship to be able to hold up. You can only bear so much force from the wind, otherwise the sails will just rip apart. So basically, we just let her drive. We pulled down the sails and just let the wind take us where it will, rather than trying to fight it. And running under a certain island, which is called Claudia, we had much work to come by the boat, which when we had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ships, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksand, strake sail, and were so driven. All right, there's a lot going on here. You've got the main ship, and then there was a little secondary boat on it. The secondary boat, it sounds like it was down and in a position not secured very tightly. They were only going to be close to Crete and trying to get a little ways, and they'd probably need that to help land. And so they went near this island, again, running under, just like with Crete. They're in a little bit protected area. I don't know where this island is. I don't know if it shows up anywhere. Where you got this crazy storm, you've got a little bit of protection. And so we're going to try and get our little boat up onto the ship. And then we're going to use helps to undergird the ship. Well, that means is they literally passed lines and ropes underneath the keel of the ship and wrapped it around, trying to secure it. All right, this is a very violent storm. You've got a little bit of a reprieve. Let's make this thing as tight as possible, so it doesn't just get ripped apart. Apparently that was a practice then to try and give it some extra shoring. So they did that, but they were fearful from where they were at that they were going to fall into some quicksand, some sandbars, some bluffs. They couldn't stay there. And so they again took down their sails, and they were just driven in the storm. And so they are going to get blown around. I mean, imagine this is a storm. It's dark, it's windy, it's raining, it's cold because it's wintertime. And this goes on day after day after day. The next day after they had secured the ship some more, they were so tossed with the tempest. They're like, we need to lighten the ship so we can ride higher in the waves. And so they started throwing stuff overboard. The third day, they started throwing off parts of the ship that you used to drive the ship, the tackling, the different ropes and whatever, supplies. They didn't get rid of all of it, but that's how desperate they were, is they're starting to cannibalize the ship. And then neither sun nor stars in many days appeared. All right, so imagine you're just basically tracking across the Atlantic. We've got hurricanes that run for a real long time, and you're just hanging out in one of those the whole way. Imagine that's probably more like what it felt like being in this. I mean, you're not seeing the sun, you're not seeing the stars, you've just got these dark, ominous clouds, the rain, the winds pushing you back and forth, and you're in, this little wooden boat. It's big enough to hold nearly 300 people, but still a little boat. It says, no small tempest lay on us, and all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. All right, you've got days and days of this thing, and they've all given up hope. We're gonna die. There's no way about it. But then, after a long abstinence, all right, so I don't know if this 8, 9, 10 days, however long it's been, Paul winds up standing up in the middle of them and, shouting to be heard over the commotion. He says, "Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me. You should have listened and not loosed from Crete to gain this harm and loss. And now I exhort you," I'm encouraging you, "be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship." So for their decision, the ship's going to be lost, but they're not going to lose any of the people that are on board. Right, that's really encouraging. And this is being told to people who had given up all hope of survival. How does he know that? "For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve." Right? We're talking about not the angel, we're talking about God. The God that I belong to him and I serve him. "He came and spoke to me, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar. And lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee." All right, so Jesus had actually appeared to Paul back in Jerusalem, telling him as he had testified at Jerusalem, he was also going to testify at Rome. And so Paul could have a confidence for all this ship that he was going to survive. And now the angel says, "You will make it. You will be brought to Caesar." It's really your life that is making sure you're going to survive. But God's also going to give you all these men that sail with you, so they're going to survive too for your benefit. So he says, "Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me." Right? There's a great definition of faith there. He believes that God is able to do what he says he will do. So you believe God that it will do as has been told you. "Howbeit, we must be cast upon a certain island." All right, we are going to be crashed into a particular place. We're going to crash land on an island. That's what's going to happen. And then you're going to have a passage of time, right? I don't know again how many days it's going to be, but after it had been 2 weeks, when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in the Adria, about midnight, the shipmen deemed they were near some country. So they had made it all the way over here after 2 weeks of being blown hither and thither to this island. It's now known as Malta. And so it's midnight, and they think they can see something, possibly. And so they start measuring, where you throw a weighted line off the ship to see how long until it gets to the bottom. And there's knotted cords so you can measure it easier. And they said they sounded, and it was 20 fathoms. Turns out a fathom is the length of your outstretched arm. So if you're pulling up the rope, you pull it up once, that's 1 fathom. All right, so that's about 5 to 6 feet, depending on the guy. Well, they go a little farther, they sound it again, it's only 15 fathoms. Well, that means after you've been way out in the deep ocean for a while, you're now getting close to shore. But there's a problem with that. It's dark, it's night, you can't see the obstacles. And so they feared that they were going to fall upon a reef or the rocks. They wound up casting 4 anchors out of the back of the boat, out of the stern, and wished for day. All right, it's midnight. You've got 5, 6 longer, maybe it's wintertime, and hours before sunlight's going to come. And you're there praying that the ship anchors will hold, you won't get bashed in onto the rocks of the course of the night. Now, the sailors had the idea that we're going to take that little boat that we had saved earlier, and we're going to go escape to the shore by ourselves. And so as they were about to flee, they had already let down the boat into the sea under the color. It means this is what they were lying. This is how they pretended, saying they were going to cast some anchors out of the foreship. So, we've already got these 4 anchors back here at the back. We're going to go up to the front. We're going to use the boat to do it, and we're going to take some anchors out, make sure we're real secure. That's what they said. But Paul said to the boss, Roman, the centurion, Julius, he said to the soldiers, "Except these sailors abide in the ship, you're going to die. Except these abide in the ship, ye cannot be saved." Well, that got the soldiers' attention, and they immediately hacked the rope off the boat and let her fall away. And so the sailors weren't in it at the time, and so now they don't have a little boat. You just got the big boat, and you're anchored there waiting for day. So while day was coming on, all right, so as it's about to be daylight, Paul, again, hollers out to all of them and besought them, asked them, encouraged them, begged them, go ahead and eat something, take some food, take some meat, saying, "This day is the 14th day that ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing." All right, no one had had a single meal for this whole time that they had been driven back and forth. And you imagine just the craziness of the waves and the wind and the cold, miserable conditions, and they're fasting. He says, "Wherefore, I pray you take some meat, eat some food. This is for your health," right? Your strength. Turns out they're going to need their strength as they're going to have to swim to shore. But the encouragement is, where there shall not a hair fall from the head of any of you. All right, so you're going to be okay. You're going to survive. When he had thus spoken, he took bread, gave thanks to God in the presence of them all, and when he had broken it, he began to eat. So he set an example for them. Then they were all of good cheer, and they also took meat. And they were in the ship 260 souls. All right, 260, and another 16, so 276 people. They're now having a little bite to eat. When they'd eaten enough, they lightened the ship even further and cast the wheat into the sea. So whatever remaining cargo they had, they tossed it into the sea. And when it was day, they knew not the land. So they didn't recognize where they were. But they did see there was a certain creek with a shore into which they were minded. I mean, you imagine not every island has just a real hospitable beach or lagoon or someplace where it's safe to bring a ship in. A lot have rocky faces, and it's really dangerous. And so what they saw was, all right, here's a spot where there's a creek coming out of the ocean. We see there's a little bit of a shoreline. And so what they're going to try and do is, all right, we're going to try and ram the ship up into that creek. If we can wedge there, then maybe we can get off and survive. So they took off the anchors, because you don't have a little boat anymore to ferry people. So when they'd taken up the anchors, they committed themselves into the sea, loosing the rudder bands, and hoist the mainsail to the wind. I think the mainsail there actually turns out to be like the foremost sail. So this is not, we want full power of the wind. I mean, you still got the storm going on, right? But this is like the front sail that gives you enough to control the ship. And so the rudder bands, whatever had controlled the steering, had been fixed tight, because they weren't trying to steer against the storm. Now you're trying to aim. You got one shot to try and aim this ship into this creek there at the shore. And so they do. They try, they're aiming, and they wound up coming into a place where you've got two different seas meeting, the violence of the wave, and apparently there was a sandbar or something there, and the ship wound up running aground. And the front of it was stuck. It was secure. But the back part of the ship was not. And in fact, it was battered by the waves so much that it's actually being torn apart. So now you don't have any option of going back to sea. You're stuck tight on the front, and the back of the boat is breaking up under you. So the soldiers, since it is a big deal for a Roman soldier's prisoner to get away, and it could potentially cost you your life if you let one do so, their recommendation is, well, let's just go ahead and kill the prisoners so none of them escape, lest they swim out and should escape. But they were overruled. Their boss, Julius, the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that they that could swim should cast themselves into the sea first and get to land. So even though they've run aground, they're not actually at shore yet. They're some distance out. And so they've got to jump off and make it the rest of the way. So those that could swim, they went first, and then the rest, some on board, some on broken pieces of the ship, kind of floated their way. And so it came to pass that they all escaped to land, right? And so once they were there, they knew the name of the island was called Melita. Modern day, we call it Malta. And the barbarous people showed us no little kindness, right? Barbarous just means they weren't Greek speaking. And so the local inhabitants there, no little kindness means they were actually very kind, right? They're extremely kind for them. They kindled a fire and received us, everyone, because of the present rain and because of the cold. And so they're taking care of them. They've got a fire going. You can imagine, you just swam, you've had one meal in 14 days, you're tired, you're wet, you're miserable. And so these locals are being quite kind. And so it's while they got this fire going that Paul had gone to gather a bundle of sticks, and he wound up laying them on the fire, and there came a viper out of the heat and fastened onto his hand. All right, so this was a venomous snake. And the people there, the locals, the barbarians, which just means non-Greek, saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, and they said among themselves, well, no doubt this guy's a murderer, whom though he's escaped the sea, yet vengeance or justice suffereth not to live, right? He must be a really bad guy if he survives this crazy storm and the shipwreck, only to then be bitten by a venomous snake. Paul, what's he do? shakes off the snake and into the fire, and he didn't feel any harm. And obviously, the piercing of his hand with fangs would not feel good. But as far as he didn't swell up, he didn't, suddenly drop dead, which is exactly what the locals thought would happen. Howbeit, they looked when he should have swollen or fallen down dead. But after they looked a great while and saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds and said, well, he was a god. Right? They went to the other ditch. Instead of a murderer, he must be, immortal. Remember, the angel that told Paul, you're going to appear before Caesar. There was not a doubt about it. And so even this snake, which probably was not a coincidence. So there is an allusion at the end of Mark 16. And this is Jesus speaking to his 11, saying, go ye into all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. He that believeth not shall be damned. And these signs shall follow them that believe. In my name they shall cast out devils. They shall speak with new tongues or languages. And they will take up serpents. And they shall take up serpents. And if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. So you have this sign that had been given that a serpent would be able to bite one of God's followers, and that would be a sign that he wouldn't be injured or harmed. That illusion and this incident here is the only time those are mentioned. Right? So Satan sending the snake could not defeat the work that Paul was going to do, that Christ had intended to appear before Caesar, right? He couldn't, Satan couldn't override that. There is nothing that says that a believer in Jesus needs to be so foolish as to tempt God by going out and playing with snakes to see if they'll get bitten and survive, right? That's tempting God. That's the same thing that Satan was doing to Jesus when he took him up to the pinnacle of the temple and said, cast yourself off, for the angels shall bear thee up and not allow you to stub your toe. And Jesus' response is, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God, all right? So this is an aside, not really dealt with in the book of Acts, but there's no reason to go and pick up snakes. But there was just another indication that this was, spoken of, that even if, Satan were to send, a snake to try and kill someone, in God's service, God has the complete ability to override that. And this is the fulfillment of that. There's no other mention. So, all right. So you've got, quite a reputation there, that you were bitten by a snake and you didn't die. And so these people think you're God. And so nearby from where they landed in the same quarters, the top guy on the island, the chief man, whatever his title was, whose name was Publius, his estate, his land was nearby. And so he wound up receiving them and then lodging them courteously for 3 days. So you've got him kind of taking this big group and housing them for 3 days. After that, they would disperse amongst the island because they're going to be there for several months to winter. But while he was there, that guy's father was sick. He had a fever and he had a bloody flux. And so he had this dysentery or discharge. So he's most likely going to die. To whom Paul entered in and prayed and laid his hands on him and healed him. So when this was done, others which had diseases in the island came and they were healed likewise. And so this is very fortunate. You can think from the island inhabitants' perspective that these shipwreck individuals have crashed ashore, and now you've got 300 extra people who have no stuff. It's probably expensive to feed them, and you can see how that hospitality would wear out quickly. Except for one is exceptional, and the people who visit him are healed, and so they wind up just being very welcome. They honored us with many honors, right? So whatever they needed. When it was time to leave the island, they wound up lading us with such things that were necessary. They re-equipped them to get them on to the next stage of their journey. So just very, very grateful that they'd been there. And so they wound up staying a total of 3 months. After 3 months, we departed in the ship of Alexandria, which had wintered in the isle, whose sign was Castor and Pollux. So this ship was called Castor and Pollux. That's named for a couple of Greek or Roman gods, Jupiter's sons, and the reference in the stars, Gemini, the twins. Anyway, so you got this idolatrous name ship that is going to carry Paul forward. And so they're going to go from Malta up to Syracuse, which is on the island of Sicily. So there's a little bit of a gap between this portion of Italy and the mainland. So from Syracuse, they hung out for 3 days, and from thence we fetched a compass, which meant we went around and came to Rhegium. And after 1 day, the south wind blew, and we came to Polito. So 1 day, the south wind blowing from the south. They're trying to get north, so that's good. Blew it up there, where we found brethren, and were desired to tarry with them 7 days. All right, so you're here, you're able to be with friends and fellow believers for a week, and then they went on towards Rome. From thence, when the brethren heard of us, they came to meet us as far as Appii Forum and the 3 taverns. All right, so Rome to the north, Appii Tavern, and the 3 taverns to the south, in between that original spot. You're probably traveling on land at this point if you can meet up with folks. But these are believers who are already in Rome. Right, there was a Christian church in Rome before Paul got there. In fact, when he wrote the letter to the Romans, Paul had never visited, but he mentions, at least 30 different individuals by name who had traveled to Rome that he had already known. But so they heard he was coming. News traveled. They went down to meet him. Several, I don't know how many miles exactly between those points. And when Paul saw, these brethren coming to meet him, he thanked God and he took courage. Right? He was encouraged. I mean, you imagine the toll that this trip would have taken on any human. Paul was just a dude. He was a guy. I mean, he was very devoted to God, but this would have been quite a weird. So, this being with men who cared about him, he was encouraged. So they finally get to Rome. The centurion takes all the other prisoners and passes them off to the captain of the guard. Right, so he'd be the local jailer. But Paul, the exception, was suffered to dwell by himself with a soldier that kept him. So he got to rent out his own house and had one soldier who was posted with him to kind of keep him there under house arrest. So we got time. We're going to finish. All right. So it came to pass, after he'd been there 3 days, Paul sent a note to the chief of the Jews and called them to him. When they were come, he said, "Men and brethren, though I have committed nothing against the people," referring to the Jews, "or the customs of our father, yet I was delivered prisoner from Jerusalem into the hands of the Romans, who, when they had examined me," the Romans, "they would have let me go, because there was no cause of death in me. But when the Jews spake against it," right, the Jews spake against it, releasing Paul. They wanted him to come to Jerusalem. They were trying to murder him. "I was constrained to appeal unto Caesar." He said, I was forced into this situation. I wasn't doing this not because I had aught to accuse my nation of. He said, I didn't come here because I want to bash my nation, my people, my customs. I had to do it because when they were ready to let me go, the Jews spoke against it. So, "For this cause, therefore, I have called you, to see you and to speak to you, because that for the hope of Israel I am bound in this chain." Right? I want you to hear directly from me firsthand. Why am I, under arrest? It says, I have the hope of Israel. Right? What's that talking about? Well, that's the shorthand for what had everyone been waiting for, particularly the Pharisees, for the Christ, for the Messiah, for the Redeemer of Israel, that hope. He says, I'm bound because of that hope, right? Because he believes and knows that it was fulfilled in the person and by the work of Jesus the Christ. And so they said, "But we have neither received letters out of Judea concerning thee, neither any of the brethren that came showed or spake any harm of thee." Right? So since he left Jerusalem, really rough seas, rough weather, no mail has made it from the leaders of Jerusalem that would have arrived before him saying, hey, this guy's coming, finish our work, or poisoning the well of their perception of him. And no one that had come had, spoken any harm of him. All right. So they don't have a preconceived hatred of him. And so they're willing to listen. That's kind of the point. So what they said is they appointed him a day. All right. You give us a particular day, and then we'll all come together. Many came to him, not just the chiefs. You've got the local Jewish population. They came to his lodging because he couldn't leave, and he spent the whole day teaching. All right, to whom he expounded and testified the kingdom of God, persuading them concerning Jesus, both out of the law of Moses and out of the prophets, from morning until evening. Right, expounding that Jesus, the Christ, must needs have come and suffered and done this, and this, and Jesus has done and done this, and this, and this. And so you've got, 12 something hours of teaching of scriptural prophecy, and then the fulfillment in the person and the work of Jesus in the resurrection. What was the net result? There wasn't a consensus. Some believed the things that were spoken, and some not. And when they weren't agreed among themselves, they departed after Paul had this final word. This is what Paul said. He says, well spake the Holy Ghost by Isaiah. So he's going to quote Isaiah here. Let's see if I can get you the reference. Isaiah 6, 9, and 10. Well spake the Holy Ghost by Isaiah the prophet unto our fathers, saying, go unto this people and say. So Isaiah, you're supposed to say this. Hearing ye shall hear and not understand. Seeing ye shall see and not perceive. For the heart of this people is waxed gross, and their ears are dull of hearing. Their eyes have they closed, lest they should see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. Be it known, therefore, unto you, I think this is Paul speaking now, that the salvation of God is sent unto the Gentiles, and that they will hear it. All right, so the same thing that happened back in Jerusalem, where when he was on the castle steps giving his defense, they had been willing to listen right up until he started talking about Gentiles. This is when they departed. His final word was that Isaiah, through the Holy Ghost, said there was going to be a time when you were going to hear the truth, you were going to see the events and miracles, and because of your hearts and the dullness of your ears and eyes, you won't believe. There'll be some that won't believe. But the gospel is going to go unto the Gentiles, not just the chosen people of God from the Old Testament standpoint, but the chosen people of God from out of every kindred, nation, and tongue, and they will hear it. And after he said those words, the Jews departed, and then they go back and they have a great, discussion amongst themselves, great reasoning amongst themselves. And we don't hear any further about that. So Paul dwelt 2 whole years in his own hired house, and received all that came unto him, preaching the kingdom of God, and teaching those things which concern the Lord Jesus Christ, with all confidence, with all boldness, no man forbidding him. And so this is the end of the timeline. You don't get any more sequential information about Paul's doings. You have to kind of piece together a little bit by some of the letters that were written later, particularly to Titus and to Timothy, when he's making arrangements to meet up with them in different places after these events. But he's going to wind up appearing before Caesar, and he's going to survive that first appearance, and then he's going to have some form of liberty. Again, we don't have a point-to-point recording of that like Luke did, and the Holy Spirit did through Luke here in Acts. And then eventually we'll have the second appearance, and that's what Paul is alluding to in 2 Timothy when he talked about, at his first appearance, no man stood with him, but God did. And then, he's not anticipating surviving, right? The 2 Timothy is really his final, words to Timothy, because he anticipates that he's going to be executed, which, again, according to church history, he would, I believe, in 68 AD. So that's the book of Acts.